Welcome, dear listener. Settle in, let your body grow comfortably heavy, and allow your thoughts to soften and drift. I am Evan, your guide for tonight's tale. Thank you, truly, for choosing to be here right now. This evening we have an extra-long piece of imaginative fiction for you to rest with. It was penned by Mira Salas, and I have the quiet joy of reading it aloud. We will be traveling to the city of Kelmor, an extraordinarily unusual place. There, we will meet Liora as she sets out on a quest to restore the lifeblood of her beloved home. Fortunately, she will not face this challenge by herself. Companions appear in the most generous ways. Friends, family, and yes, even a dragon. Before the story proper, let us prepare ourselves with a small pocket of gentleness and honest care. I sincerely hope your day carried bright, enjoyable moments that made you grin in that now at last sort of way. If instead your hours felt tangled, tiring, and difficult all over, please remember this. You have made it through, which means you are another day stronger and another day wiser. With each turn of the sun, we accumulate tiny teachings, subtle character-building experiences that are easy to overlook. Our attention, drawn so quickly to discomfort, often holds onto the edgy parts of our hours long after the moments pass. And yet, when we step back, we see how every day, each laugh, each sigh, each quiet pause, gradually shapes who we are, how we move through the world, and the ways in which we understand others. So whether today felt wonderful, challenging, or somewhere in that tender space between, you are, right now, another day stronger and another day wiser. Perhaps you found a little more empathy for someone else. Perhaps you noticed that a worry you carried is not quite as heavy as it once seemed. Perhaps you learned something wholly new. Or perhaps your growth today was so delicate and so subtle that it cannot easily be named. Even so, the growth is there. And tomorrow brings another chance to learn, to soften, to stretch, no matter your age, your circumstances, or any labels attached to you. Let us help you toward deep and beautiful rest so that you are ready for whatever tomorrow chooses to bring. If your eyes are still open, allow them to close with ease. Let your shoulders loosen and your breath settle. Simply listen to the sound of my voice as we drift toward Kelmor. This is where our story begins. High above the city, Liora looked down on a landscape always in motion. The air below was a choreography of pulleys and people, of gears and great beams, blending into a continuous hum that rose toward her like a low and steady chorus. Her copper-bright hair, her work clothes, and the soft cape she insisted on wearing flickered and snapped in the warm breeze. She was perched on a steel girder hung by a crane from the side of a new structure. Within those muscular gusts was the faint, lingering smell of varnish and fresh paint. Kelmor had grown upward for as long as Liora could remember. Never satisfied, never content, forever climbing toward some exquisite culmination that always seemed just out of reach. Years ago, when Liora was still little, the city's prefect had realized they had a small problem. Small only in wording, vast in consequence. Travelers and newcomers were arriving in astonishing numbers. This peculiar and charming place had enchanted people from neighboring towns, distant cities, and countries across the sea. Groups and crowds and entire caravans poured into Kelmor. Rooms vanished first. Inns overflowed so entirely that visitors were tucked into spare corners of bakeries and restaurants. The city limits pressed hard against the next municipalities, and still it was not enough. One night, the prefect, toothbrush in hand, stood at his bathroom window and lifted his gaze to the dark sky. That is it, he thought. If we cannot spread, we will rise. The order went out. Foundations were reinforced, climbing cranes arrived, and tireless building automatons were introduced. Years later, the result was this. A city that was always under construction and always in need of workers. And here sat Liora, taking her lunch on a narrow span of steel high above the world she loved. She popped the last crumb of her sandwich into her mouth, then rose and balanced with a practiced ease. A small robot clung to the beam beside her, Pip, who hung his little head in a theatrical show of shame. "This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever," Liora scolded with exaggerated seriousness. "You do not need food. You never need food. And yet half the time, you are rummaging around in my lunch bag as if you intend to eat every last bite." Pip replied in a language of beeps and warbles, playing with pitch as though he were deliberately composing a melody of apology. This time he released a long, low tone and lifted his shoulders in a mechanical attempt at a shrug. Liora chuckled, dug into the deep pocket of her overalls, and tossed a small handful of nuts and bolts into Pip's little mouth slot. Pip swallowed happily, one must say, twirled once on the girder, and gave a long, triumphant beep worthy of an enthusiastic ovation. For Liora, there was always more to do. New floors for eateries, inns, and bakeries seemed to emerge at every turn, keeping pace with a constant flow of wide-eyed arrivals. Her task was to paint, no minor assignment in Kelmor. The city held fiercely to a beloved aesthetic, so unusual and so deeply specific that even the most advanced automatons could not quite replicate it. Liora swirled her brush in a bucket and studied the wall she had completed earlier. Greens and blues and yellows, stripes and lines, splatters and neat polka dots. By night, the pigments glowed, bathing streets and rooftops in shimmering color. To Liora, the city was alive, breathing with color and light. The work was demanding, yes, but her heart lived in it, and she cherished that devotion. With one long, satisfying stroke, she drew her brush down the building's edge. Her cape corkscrewed behind her, catching the wind. Her father always asked why she wore the cape to work. Every single time she tied the knot at her throat, and every single time, she gave the same, not at all ordinary answer. On clear blue days at that high altitude, standing on a beam that held steady beneath her boots, she felt almost as if she were flying. Kelmor was an amalgam: steel, smoke, wood, and willpower. It was vivacious and eccentric, a patchwork of houses built from a catalog of materials. The city married innovation to familiarity. Clever mechanisms and bright panels shoulder to shoulder with timber eaves, chimney smoke, and streets paved in cobblestone. Daylight spilled across facades painted in an almost infinite assortment of colors. Then night arrived, and neon letters and glowing pigments took over. When rain visited, the wet stone reflected the world like an oil painting. Surfaces glowing, edges softening, everything gleaming with that not quite real magic. Perhaps the best description would be makeshift in the most affectionate sense. Beautiful in its weathering, lovelier still because thousands of hands and hearts had shaped it into home. Days tilted into nights and back again. Kelmor climbed to extraordinary heights, and its people carried on. The day the power failed, Cael sat on a tall stool in the brightest quarter of the city, eating ramen. Tender noodles, a generous slice of braised pork belly, and an orange-scented egg rested in a fragrant broth. He admired the meal with the reverence of a daily ritual. The place smelled of toasted bean sprouts and tangy, spicy kimchi. The kitchen was laid out so that diners could watch every motion. Chef Sora, the only cook on duty, believed that the spectacle of making food was as important as the act of eating it. Wearing a tall white hat, he spoke about ingredients with easy confidence, complaining with wry humor that he could not procure the rice he usually favored. Cael nodded from time to show he was indeed listening. Then the chef turned, flicked the ignition on his grill, and frowned. No flame. Cael's eyes drifted to the window. On the cobblestones outside, a neon sign reflected in a rain-filled puddle. Bright orange letters, black borders. He lifted a mouthful of broth, swallowed, and glanced back. The reflection had vanished. He set his chopsticks on the bowl and leaned forward. One after another, signs dimmed. Street lamps winked out. The district fell to darkness. High on her beam, Liora finished the final wall of the day. She sat and gazed as the paint began its familiar luminescent bloom. It looked like a rainbow translated into light, a bouquet made of color rather than petals. Pip chimed beside her in a string of metallic syllables. Liora patted his head. "I know," she murmured. "It is beautiful." She slipped a few tools into her rucksack and began lowering the beam, hoping to reach home before supper. The rope held steady until, abruptly, the city dimmed. To her astonishment, the paint dimmed too. Shock loosened her fingers. The rope slid. Her bag toppled and fell, landing with a thump beside a young man with dark, floppy hair. For a breath or two, the world became a confusion of black shapes. Liora hopped down, feeling her way across uneven ground, chasing scattered brushes and tins. The young man crouched to help, and they bumped shoulders. He asked carefully how many fingers he was holding up. Liora gave a tiny shrug. "I cannot see anything at all," she admitted. "And I am more worried about my companion, Pip." The little bot, dazed, let out a soft warble. Unharmed, only disoriented. The young man chuckled shyly and reached a hand toward the empty air, then remembered the darkness and explained, very politely, that he was attempting to shake her hand. "Cael," he said, giving his name as though offering something fragile. Liora found Pip and lifted him. "Torch, please," she whispered at his metal ear. A clean white beam burst from Pip's eyes. Cael drew in a breath. "What is wrong?" Liora asked. "My home is on the far side of the city," he said. "Walking by feel through this thick blackness. No, not possible." Eddies of voices swelled across nearby windows, worrying, wondering, calling out. No one could remember how the power began in the first place, or who maintained it, or where to go to turn it back on. It had simply always been there, like sunlight on a clear morning. Liora smiled even now. "Do not worry," she told Cael. "Come with me. My family will make room for you. They will insist on it." Cael smiled back, relief mixing with gratitude, and walked at her side as she cradled Pip like a small beacon. Grit crackled under their soles on the old stones. With their senses sharpened by darkness, they noticed the gentle stream of water traveling through downpipes. Pip's light spread across their path, and before long they arrived at a house like no other, part machine, part brick and mortar, with a constellation of neon signs now dull as sleeping embers. Liora turned her key, pushed the door, and called out. Supper unfolded by candlelight, and Pip's torch dimmed to a soft glow. Conversation orbited the day's strange event. Liora's mother and father sat with knit brows, talking, untalking, circling back to silence. Her grandfather rested with eyes closed. Her grandmother, with dry humor, announced that it was now at last time Liora brought home a friend. Cael and Liora laughed. The little ones, Nina and Teo, fished every dumpling and strand of meat out of their bowls and then nudged the remaining greens around until the broth cooled. In spite of everything, the family kept the mood gently buoyant. After several rounds of bartering and bargaining that would have impressed any seasoned diplomat, the children were ushered to bed, and sleep found them fast. The adults lingered, mulling the darkened city. Tea warmed the hands. Conversation rose and fell. Cael explained how far he had to travel in blackness to reach his home. Liora's parents waved away worry. He would stay here, of course. With that settled, they, too, said goodnight and drifted off. Grandmother patted Cael and Liora on the head with a little flourish that managed to be both affectionate and regal, then retired. Cael sipped tea and studied grandfather. Liora smiled. He is a man of few words, she said. Cael mouthed the question, still learning the family's rhythms. Awake? Liora chuckled and nodded. Yes, awake. The talk turned, inevitably, to the city's power. Grandfather opened one eye. Cael straightened, breath caught. A moment later, the other eye opened. My family tells of an ancient legend, Grandfather said. His voice was low, slow, and so resonant that you could feel the rumble in your own chest. Liora sipped broth, half amused, fully attentive. Feeling Cael's gaze resting on him, Grandfather continued. There was said to be a great dragon with immeasurable power, the power that breathes life itself. Dragons and humans once worked in harmony. People built with their hands, and dragons breathed vitality into what was made. This was long, long ago. No dragon has been seen for many years. But if one could be found, that would be the key to ending this darkness. He exhaled, shut his eyes again, and added, with heavy solemnity sweetened by a glint of mischief. It is a pity there are not two brave young people willing to journey beyond the wilderness to find one. Liora looked at Cael. Cael looked at Liora. They both lifted their shoulders in small, helpless shrugs. Grandfather, eyes shut and arms folded, had the posture of a shop whose sign now reads closed for the evening. Cael wanted more detail, but questions slid off the old man's calm like rain from a roof. So the two moved quietly through the kitchen, tidying bowls and cups, sleeves rolled, water steaming. And the city, having puzzled and fretted and argued itself toward exhaustion, laid its worries at bedside and surrendered to rest. In the spare room with the sliding doors, Liora and Cael lay side by side, speaking softly. Their conversation roamed the entire span of the human and the almost magical. Through the open doors, they looked out at the candlelit city. Cael asked, what lies beyond those darkened signs, beyond the boards and chimneys and rooms that hold friends and lovers and children? Liora admitted she did not know. That admission opened a very large door in both of them. What if we were brave enough to go? Possibility rustled through them. Excitement did too. Sleep arrived mid-sentence. Cael whispered good night to the air and slipped under. Dawn was sweet and pale when it came. Liora rose, puzzled that Cael had already gone from the room. The sliding doors stood wide. Wooden shutters tapped lightly in the early breeze. She yawned, ran her fingers through her thick copper hair, and glanced at the few objects Cael had left near the futon. A simple iron-plated chain he wore always, 2 smooth leather bands with button-like clasps, a paper slip from a noodle house, and a small leather notebook she did not open because something in her heart told her to leave it be. Laughter burst from the next room. A flurry, bright and irresistible. Drawn by the warmth, Liora padded down the hall. In the living space, the shutters stood open to a wash of golden light. Nina and Teo giggled at a story Cael told, animated and gentle at once. Liora's parents sipped tea from small cups. Grandfather, still technically asleep, kept a smile tucked at the corner of his mouth. Grandmother confiscated stray grains of rice from every bowl with a slowness that could only be called ceremonial. Cael, shy but proud, presented Liora with a bowl of fluffy rice, kimchi, and 2 fried eggs and said he had made it himself. Grain by grain, she ate, listening as he wove tales of Chef Sora's place. How he had been there since the very beginning, when the restaurant was nothing but beams and stacks of brick in sacks. Little Cael had believed he could build the whole shop himself. Chef Sora had lifted him onto a newly arrived stool and told him that what people call magic is the patient product of time, hard work, and love. Every one of the 3 necessary. Orders came, walls rose, the years turned. Cael grew from small to not so small to grown. Liora felt grandfather's attention on her, though each time she looked, he sat like a statue, arms folded, eyes closed. Cael's glance kept drifting to the old man as if pulled by a tide. Whenever Liora tried to catch Cael's eyes, he lowered them with a tiny smile. At last, the final grains of rice disappeared. The room quieted of its own accord. Every gaze, and it seemed even the light itself, turned toward grandfather. Without opening his eyes, he spoke in that deep, gravel-warm tone. Liora, Cael, you must travel to the edge of our land, to the place we call the Unmapped, and you must seek a dragon. Liora began to protest, but grandfather lifted one palm, gentle and absolute. Yes, he said, it must be you. The reasons will become clear. Liora's father rubbed her mother's shoulders in that way that says, I am here and this is hard. They did not want to say goodbye. Liora and Cael returned to the spare room without speaking. The moment Cael slid the door shut, Liora threw a pillow at him. He laughed. She asked if he had spoken to grandfather before sunrise. He nodded. It is his wish, Cael said softly, and I am only your helper. But listen, this is the chance of a lifetime. I know we barely know each other at all, not even a little, and yet I am certain you want to go. Liora looked at the 2 brown backpacks on the floor and smiled. We had better get ready, she said. And that was that. The noonday sun climbed to its throne. Before setting out, they took turns in the steaming bathroom. Boxes of food slid into their rucksacks until there was no space whatsoever remaining. Liora wanted Pip to come, but his charge had run down and there was no way to restore it while the city slept in dark. They had barely stepped into the street when grandfather came after them. He lifted the chain from his neck, the iron-plated one Liora had noticed before, and placed it around hers. Your strength, he said, is the way you love, and love as strong as yours is the key to boundless magic. Liora wrapped her arms around him, fervent and grateful. Cael watched. Something deep inside his chest stirred. So much was this so that he almost named it, but not yet. Grandfather turned back toward the house and walked away until his figure became a small outline against the bright street. Liora and Cael stood for a moment absorbing the new, strange city. Its color faded, its citizens subdued. Kelmor pressed on, stubborn as ever, turning to coal and steam and fire as it had in old days. Yet the mood was different, a drifting kind of aimlessness. A collective wish whispered into the air that things would return to the way they had been. As they walked, they talked, and with the sun lowering they felt they had known each other for seasons instead of hours. Cael admitted his favorite color was brown. Liora blinked. Brown? He explained, chocolate is brown. The earth that holds every root is brown. The cobblestones and chimneys fell away as the path shifted to greener things. Thickets, soft dirt, leaf-heavy branches. Afternoon's gleam melted into the gold of evening. They walked until their feet insisted on rest. Cael spotted a cave whose mouth was jagged but welcoming, lit by old torches. The floor was deeply padded with moss. A rolled blanket rested in one corner. They ate slowly from their packs. The food was still a little warm, and Liora thought it tasted like home plus something extra. She whispered thank you. Cael, smiling, whispered you are welcome. After the meal, Liora tipped her head and admired the sky. The moon was round and enormous, glowing softly. Small, crisp stars flickered in the cool air, distant. The way home felt at that exact moment. Full bellies invited drowsiness. In long, drawn-out voices they traded nursery rhymes and mythic stories from childhood. Cael told of a conscripted soldier who ran from his base training to search the world for something that would make him strong enough, brave enough to fight. He met a plainly dressed elder who handed over the only thing he owned, a sword. The soldier returned fearless and defeated the camp's symbolic adversary when the hour came, sure it had been the sword's magic. He searched for the elder to return credit. He found him and learned the truth. The man was not wise, not magical. The sword was ordinary. The strength had lived within the soldier all along. So the power he needed, Liora said softly, was inside him from the beginning. Cael nodded and asked for a story in return. Liora rummaged through the cupboards of her memory and found them empty, until she did not. There it was, the tale grandfather had told her when she was little. My family tells of an ancient legend, she began, letting her voice tilt toward grandfather's cadence. Once there was a family of dragons, creatures born of magic. Their fire was not only a weapon, it was a tool. A dragon's breath could accomplish great and gentle wonders. They lived peacefully on green land, alongside other magical beings, hatching their young, growing 100-fold. Dragons, ancient in wisdom, often spoke prophecies to human travelers who came seeking understanding. One such prophecy sounded like a riddle. A dragon not in his original form will forge a land far from here. There were 2 dragon brothers, Liora continued. They studied their kind's history, equal in affection and similar in form. One morning they woke to find their family gone. They searched every corner of their realm and could not find them. At last they sat on a hill overlooking the only home they knew. The elder said, "We must build a legacy. You must go far from here, create a new land, and remember that whatever trial rises, you will be brave enough to meet it." The younger asked, "And you?" The elder answered, "This ground is sacred. Someone must remain to help the seekers who come with questions. Do not worry, brother. I will always love you. Perhaps time will return us to one another." Then he turned to his younger brother and bestowed a gift. "Walk the world as humans do." The younger went, carrying the elder's love and the bright hope that they would meet again. Liora paused. "I cannot remember the rest," she admitted. Cael's eyes were closed, nearly asleep. Without opening them, he reached a hand and rested it gently against Liora's cheek. "Your grandfather tells very good stories," he murmured, and then sleep took them both. The night was so quiet it seemed even the crickets were dreaming. Bears somewhere snorted. Squirrels muttered. Deer yawned. In the cave, 2 friends breathed slow and steady and dreamed of heroes and dragons. Morning arrived like a kind guest. Liora stretched and felt a poke at her shin. 2 men stood over them, walking sticks in hand, wearing expressions of puzzled wonder. They noted, from clothes and accents, that Liora and Cael were not from here and asked to be sure. Liora and Cael, still fogged with sleep, stared up at them. The strangers explained they were searching for Kelmor. Cael sat up, fully awake now. "Perhaps we can help each other," he said. "We are looking for a place called the Unmapped." "The Unmapped," said the taller one, "is quite a place if you know which way to go." Liora brightened. "Left from this cave and straight ahead?" The man smiled. "Left and straight for a couple of weeks." Liora and Cael groaned. They explained Kelmor's predicament. No power, no clear solution. The city drifting toward a halt. The shorter man glanced at his companion and asked whether they should mention the well. After a pause, the taller one nodded. "There is a well with old power," he said. "It transports a person wherever they wish to go, provided their intentions are noble. From here it is only a day's walk." Liora told them how to find the city. Cael insisted on feeding them in thanks. They refused at first, polite and stubborn, but soon accepted. Seated around a small fire, they traded stories and customs. The younger introduced himself as Chun, the taller as Kai. Their families, they said, were friends of dragons, though they themselves had not seen one in a long time. Cael described the noodle house. Liora described painting new levels of Kelmor. There was more than enough food. When laughter finally faded, they parted with sincere wishes for one another's luck. The path thickened with hedges whose vines twisted together. Heavy with fruit, they brushed Liora's sleeves as she walked. She tried, for the 1000th time, to recall the end of grandfather's legend, but Cael interrupted by nudging her ribs, asking, with ridiculous ceremony, whether she happened to be the undefeated champion of blackberries. He plucked 3 or 4 berries and flipped them toward his mouth in a display of ambition that earned the title Valiant Failure. Liora laughed and accepted the challenge. Her toss sent 2 berries neatly in. Cael applauded very slowly, as though honoring a master. They paused now and then to bathe in a stream, to fill bottles, to eat something small. The scenery flowed, birch to oak to bright blossom. The hedge trail ended as if cut with a knife. No animals rustled. The sound of cascading water drifted from not far away. Ahead lay a clean oval of pale stone, a patch of plush green grass, and a riot of flowers. At the center stood a pink blossom tree arching over a stone circle, a well. As they approached, calm came down like a blessing. It felt exactly like the stories about light magic, the true, bright kind. The grass was thicker than any carpet, and out of reverence they tiptoed to avoid bruising the flowers. A small plaque on the well read, "Please introduce yourself." Liora and Cael exchanged baffled glances, then announced their names and favorite foods in voices that sounded both awkward and correct. From the well's depths, a cheerful voice replied, "Hello there." They jumped, laughed at themselves, and listened. "I am the wishing well," the voice said with steady delight, "and I am at your service. Your hearts are pure, and your cause is noble. I can take you wherever you wish, only say the word." Liora nodded at Cael and spoke clearly. They wished to travel beyond the wilderness, to the land called the Unmapped. The well agreed but mentioned, with a hint of older knowledge, that others had sought a dragon before and had hoped these two would succeed. Liora and Cael held hands as instructed. There was a soft sound. Not a bang, more a hush, and the world changed. Fog, hills, distant mountains, vegetation unlike anything they had known. Dew gathered in bright beads along the grass at their feet. The air grew warmer. Coats and cardigans were stowed. They kept holding hands longer than necessary, as though courage could flow between palms. They walked deeper into the Unmapped, passing others who flickered in and out of view, moving like whispers through the mist. Liora felt Cael's fingers threaded with her own and found comfort there. Their talk resumed in easy back and forth, stories and fragments, the familiar rhythm of shared steps. The land shifted again. Sandy, rocky, a hush of desolation. Something large and maroon stirred in the distance. Scales jagged, immense. Could that shape be a sleeping dragon? Cael squeezed Leora's hand hard. Leora's mind swung to grandfather and a memory of long ago. A little girl refusing sleep, flinging covers, determined to remain awake like the grown-ups. Grandfather smoothing the blanket twice, just so. The offer of a story, the story of the 2 dragon brothers. Little Liora watched his face, then yawned, turned onto her side, and dreamed it exactly as he told it, night after night. But this moment was not a dream. Liora and Cael stood before a living dragon. "Who are you?" The dragon breathed, voice heat-rough and ancient. Their plan had been to wake him gently, but Cael, overcome by dust, sneezed. The dragon's lid lifted, his eye fixed on them. Cael apologized in a rush. The dragon rolled that enormous eye, sighed the sigh of a weary elder, and grumbled that an ancient creature might desire a patch of genuine peace, just once. "I cannot help you," he said finally. I am avoiding the endless stream of travelers seeking me. Hiding, Cael echoed, astonished. The dragon's mouth curled in something like a chuckle. Not exactly what you expected, is it? He teased. Liora looked into that great gaze and found something familiar, something almost tender. Perhaps, she said, we can help you. The dragon curled as though preparing to sleep again and groaned. Cael edged forward and, as respectfully as one can when touching a legend, rested his hand on the dragon's tail. Liora sat in the sand beside the giant head and patted the scaled brow. Your name? She asked gently. Aker, he replied. Liora introduced herself and Cael and explained their quest. Their city needed light, needed breath, needed the pulse that had vanished. Aker sighed. I cannot help, he said. There is no magic left in me. I long for my brother. Without thinking, Liora lifted grandfather's chain from her chest. The pendant began to glow, first warm, then brilliant. Light folded around Aker. When it dimmed, a man sat where the dragon's great chest had been. A man with age in his face and a steadiness in his bearing that felt unmistakably draconic. The missing words from grandfather's legend surged into Leora's mind. With the aid of this pendant, she whispered, the weary dragon is granted the gift his brother received, to be humbled and to walk on two legs as humans do. Aker, now a kindly old man, wrapped Liora in an embrace. You are proof my brother found the love he deserved, he said, voice thick with wonder. Cael shook Aker's hand, and the three of them laughed, long, relieved laughter that felt like water after thirst. They found a stream, cupped their hands, and drank. The water tasted cool and precise and somehow bright. Yes, this was the work of light magic, the gentlest kind. As they walked, through valleys and over ridges, across green breadths and into soft woods, Liora and Cael tried to convey Kelmor's particular beauty. Aker listened with delight and a shade of disbelief. After many miles, night unrolled itself overhead. They found a cave. Liora gathered moss. Cael heated food. Aker coaxed a fire to life. They leaned against the angled wall while Aker made shadow animals that strode across stone. Sleep tugged at the young traveler's eyes. My family tells of an ancient legend, Aker said, and Liora smiled as she settled deeper. He spun tale after tale until his own lids drooped. The cave grew quiet except for the soft crackle of shared flame. Morning came with scents Liora knew well. Kimchi's tang, rice's comfort, the savory promise of eggs. Cael had warmed leftovers at the coals and was inordinately proud that the eggs had not broken in the packs. They ate slowly, grateful not only for the food but for the nearness of home and the closeness of one another. Aker mentioned a shortcut, an old path out of the unmapped, and so by early afternoon they reached a hedged trail heavy with blackberries at the city's fringe. Aker tried Cael's berry-tossing game exactly twice, then abandoned ceremony for handfuls, placing each berry on his tongue to let it burst with that now at last flavor. Coal smoke curled above rooftops. They were home. Streets were thinner with people than usual. Noon light lay across Kelmor in clean sheets. Color still slept. Building automatons stood quiet along curbs. Inside, citizens kept to rooms, conversations subdued. They walked faster as blocks grew familiar. Cael pointed, telling story after story of inns and stalls, naming them not as businesses but as places where specific laughter and specific memories lived. Kelmor, like a person, had weathered seasons and grown up without losing its essential scent. They turned a corner, and Cael's words slowed. On the bench outside Leora's home sat grandfather, hands on his knees, eyes closed, breathing deep. Aker, he answered back, as if those syllables were both apology and homecoming. In that embrace, power surged outward. Every wall Liora had ever painted awakened, glowing in jubilant hues. Signs hummed, lamps flared, circuits brightened like dawn poured into glass. Liora slid an arm around Cael. Cael drew her close by the waist. Pip burst from the front door, bouncing and whirring, circling their legs with an ecstatic low hum that could only be called satisfaction. That evening, Liora safe, Acker welcomed, Len restored. The entire family walked to Chef Sora's noodle house. Nina and Teo ate dumplings until they could do nothing else but sigh with happiness. Liora savored rice and eggs and kimchi in quantities that would sustain any painter for a long while. Cael had his ramen, solemn and joyful as a ceremony. Others sampled everything: sushi, rice bowls, small plates that traveled the table like comets of flavor. At last, the sun lowered itself, and the sky darkened. As night gathered, Liora's handiwork brightened. From the window they gazed out over neon letters and glowing paint. The city pulsed again, alive with light, alive with love, alive with electricity. Evermore. The city of Kelmor had erupted in brilliance when the two dragon brothers embraced. For the first time in a generation, its rooftops shimmered in colors so vivid that people spilled into the streets just to stare at them. Paint glowed along every wall Liora had touched, neon signs returned to life, and the old machines rumbled back to motion as though they had simply been waiting for this long-delayed breath of power. And yet, for all the laughter, for all the jubilant cheering that rose into the night sky, not even a single citizen could deny a quiet tremor in the air. The city was alive again. Yes, but the very way its light pulsed hinted that this was not the end of the story. It was, if anything, only the fragile beginning of something larger. Liora stood beside Cael outside the noodle house, their shoulders nearly brushing, both watching Acker and Len. The two elders, once separated by centuries of solitude, walked side by side down the lantern-lit street, their movements slow, deliberate, reverent. Len's eyes were closed in that way of his, but the corners of his mouth betrayed the smile he was trying so hard to conceal. Acker, humbled into human form, still carried within him the weight of dragon memory, and when he turned his head toward the painted buildings, his breath caught as though he recognized an old song woven into the very bricks. Pip danced circles around them, letting out beeps so long and delighted that children followed him, clapping their hands as if he were a tiny festival parade all by himself. But beneath all that brightness, Liora felt the faint tug of unease. The glow of the paint, her paint, flickered once, just a tremor, so small no one else seemed to notice. She pressed her lips together. Perhaps she imagined it. Perhaps it was only the aftershock of light returning. She said nothing, but Cael, who had been studying her face with the careful attention of someone who already knew her silences, leaned close enough to whisper, "You saw it too, didn't you?" She did not answer, only gave a half-shrug that was more confession than denial. Later, when the celebrations thinned and families drifted home, Liora and Cael sat with Acker and Len in the workshop that served as her family's dining room and gathering space. Candles sputtered against the walls, casting shadows that looked like wings. Grandmother dozed in a chair, chin against her chest, while Mother quietly collected the bowls. The two brothers spoke in low tones. "The power that runs through this city," Acker said slowly, "is not endless. It was always drawn from the breath of dragons, from the life we shared. When we separated, when the lines of kinship frayed, that flow weakened. Tonight we rekindled it, but it will not hold unless the bond is tended." Len nodded once, eyes still closed, as if the images of memory were so bright inside him he needed no sight at all. Unity kept the current alive. Separation nearly ended it. The city will flourish for a time, but if Kelmor leans only on what we gave tonight, it will falter again. The words sank heavy into the air. Cael's jaw tightened. Then what must we do? Acker's answer came with a sigh. There are others. Dragons who walked far, farther than even we can imagine. Some chose to hide, some chose to sleep, some chose to change their form. If the flow is to endure, the bond between our kind and humankind must be renewed. That means finding them. He looked at Liora then, his human eyes still carrying the glint of scales. It will not be easy. Her heart leapt, the same wild flutter she had felt on the steel beams when she spread her cape and pretended to fly. Adventure again, yes, danger, but also discovery, and the chance to do something that mattered more than herself. Cael saw that spark in her, and he did not even try to hide his answering smile. Then we go, he said simply, as if the decision had already been carved into stone. The days that followed were filled with both celebration and preparation. Citizens returned to their trades, machines clattered back to life, markets reopened, and yet in every conversation there lingered mention of the blackout. Children asked questions their parents could not answer. Some spoke in awe of the Dragon Brothers. Others dismissed it as bedtime tales come to life. But wherever Liora went, people glanced at her with something new in their expressions. Respect, perhaps, or gratitude, or maybe a quiet recognition that she had stood at the center of a story greater than herself. Pip, meanwhile, became something of a minor celebrity. He whirred through the streets, proudly demonstrating his torch eyes to anyone who asked. Children squealed with delight as he projected little beams onto walls. Merchants, half joking and half serious, asked whether he might be hired to light their stalls. He puffed himself up with beeps so triumphant that Liora laughed until her sides ached. But every night, when she laid him on her workbench and oiled his joints, she whispered the same thing. "You are mine, little one, and you will go with me." For she knew, deep inside, that wherever the next road led, Pip belonged at her side. Cael spent his days between helping Sora at the Noodle House and visiting Liora's family, but more and more often his path led him beside her. Sometimes they walked the scaffolds together, and he steadied the ropes while she painted. Sometimes he told stories of his childhood, of the time he believed he could build an entire restaurant with his bare hands, of how Chef Sora taught him patience. His words were never grand, but Liora loved how he spoke them. With honesty, with a touch of shy humor, with pauses that let her slip her own memories between his. At dusk, the four, Liora, Cael, Acker, and Len, gathered to plan. Len, though still more inclined to silence than speech, told them what he knew of the old maps. "Beyond the river plain," he murmured, "past the line of black pines, there are caverns. In those caverns, long ago, dwelled two sisters of our kin. If they remain, they may know what path others took." Acker added that the sisters had always been tricksters, half in love with mischief. "They might test you," he warned. Before offering help, Liora felt a thrill at the thought. A challenge meant a story worth telling. On the morning of departure, the family gathered once more. Mother fussed over provisions, filling packs with rice balls, jars of pickled vegetables, and dried fish. Father clasped Cael's shoulder in that wordless way men share when they have no easy phrases for care. Grandmother pressed a charm into Liora's palm, a little wooden carving of a bird. "For safe passage," she said, her voice softer than usual. The children clung to Liora's cape until she promised to return with stories so fantastic that their imaginations would burst. Len and Acker stood like ancient pillars at the gate. "Remember," Len intoned, "the bond between hearts is as vital as the bond between species. What you carry between you two, hold it close, It will guide you more surely than any map. His closed eyes almost seemed to see more than open ones ever could. Aker smiled, weary but proud. Go, and may the old breath walk with you. And so they set off again. Liora, Cael, and Pip, down roads that curved away from the comfort of painted walls into the wild unknown. The river plain lay broad and silver under the sky, its currents tugging at their reflections, as if to remind them that everything flows, nothing holds still. The black pines rose like sentinels in the distance, their trunks so tall and so dark they seemed to drink the very sunlight. As they approached, the air grew cooler, laced with resin and mystery. Liora felt her cape lift behind her in the wind, and for a fleeting heartbeat she believed she could rise above it all. Cael reached for her hand, steady and sure, and Pip trilled a note so bright it echoed between the trees. Whatever lay ahead, trickster sisters, forgotten dragons, or trials yet unnamed, they would face it together. The city behind them gleamed, but the world before them called, and their steps rang out with the promise of another legend being written. The city of Kelmor glowed for nights on end after the reunion of the two brothers. People who had lived their entire lives in dim streets or beneath lamps that flickered uncertainly now wandered in wonder through boulevards painted in living light. They touched the walls as though expecting the colors to rub off on their hands. They danced in alleys where neon reflected in puddles, and they told their children again and again the story of how the darkness had been broken. Yet while laughter rang, a current of unease wove quietly beneath. Many whispered in kitchens and shops that the light felt fragile, almost as though it had returned only to warn of its own passing. Liora and Cael noticed it most keenly. When she painted, her brush sometimes left a trail that glimmered bright, only to dim seconds later before returning again. Pip's torchlight, though cheerful, sputtered once in a way that made him trill nervously, as if even his little body sensed the imbalance. Aker and Len sat often together in the evenings, speaking in murmurs too low for anyone else to hear. The old men carried weight in their voices, the memory of dragons who had watched whole centuries pass. When Liora asked what troubled them, Aker only said, "The bond between our kind and yours is a flame that must be fed, not merely remembered." It was Len who finally explained, "The city draws from a stream of life older than stone, older than water. We two alone cannot keep it steady. Other kin must be found, or the light will fade once more." His eyes remained closed, but the firmness of his voice left no doubt. Cael had leaned forward, fists curled in his lap, and asked the only question that mattered, "Where do we go?" The answer was the Black Pines, a place whispered of in children's rhymes, beyond the river plain, where two sisters were said to have taken refuge in caverns older than time. Preparation was swift. The city provided what it could: dried fish, rice cakes, water flasks, bundles of herbs to ward off insects. Grandmother pressed a charm carved into the shape of a bird into Leora's palm. Mother wrapped shawls around their shoulders. Father clasped Cael's arm with unspoken trust. Pip whirred in excitement, leaping into Leora's pack before anyone could suggest leaving him behind. Aker and Len stood by the gate as they had before. "You must carry not only food but faith," Aker told them. Len, with a faint smile, added, "And do not forget that courage often hides in the smallest acts." Then he reached out, placed a hand on both their shoulders, and whispered words so old that neither understood them, but both felt them sink into their bones like warmth. The road out of Kelmor was both familiar and strange. Familiar because Liora had walked many of the lower streets as a girl, watching buildings climb higher each year. Strange because now she and Cael left the city behind in truth. The river plain stretched wide, gleaming silver under a sky so open it seemed to swallow them whole. The further they walked, the more the sounds of the city faded until only the crunch of their boots and Pip's occasional chirp remained. Grass swayed in endless rhythm, bending with the wind as though pointing them onward. Cael kept up a steady line of talk, half to reassure her, half to reassure himself. He told stories of his youth, of Chef Sora teaching him to slice vegetables so thin light could pass through them, of the way he once believed ramen could fix every sorrow in the world. Liora listened, smiling, but her eyes were on the horizon where the black pines waited. Each step closer made the air feel heavier, as if those trees had been drinking sunlight for centuries and now guarded it jealously. By dusk they reached the edge of the forest. The trunks rose like columns of a cathedral, impossibly tall, bark darker than nightfall. Even the air beneath the branches seemed muted, thick with resin and silence. Pip's light illuminated only a small circle, swallowed quickly by the vastness around. "It feels like walking into the ribs of some enormous beast," Cael whispered, voice almost reverent. Liora nodded, gripping her cape tighter. "Then let us hope it is a gentle beast," she replied, though her own heart hammered with equal parts fear and wonder. They made camp at the forest's edge, not daring to push further until daylight. Their fire crackled nervously, as if aware of where it burned. Shadows bent strange against the pines, twisting into shapes of wings and claws. Over the flames Cael asked, "Do you believe the sisters are still here?" Liora thought of Len's words, of how old his voice had sounded. "If they are not, then we will find where they went. And if they are—" she paused, staring at the embers. "Then we must prove worthy of their help." Pip warbled softly, as though agreeing. Cael leaned back, folding his arms under his head, and murmured, "Worthy, that is the harder part." Night pressed heavy. The forest exhaled deep groans as trunks shifted in the wind. Liora dreamed of colors bleeding from walls, dripping like melted glass until the city below drowned in them. She woke sweating, clutching grandfather's pendant. Cael stirred beside her, reached out instinctively, and without words their hands twined together until sleep returned. Morning brought thin shafts of light piercing the canopy. They entered the black pines in silence, every sound amplified. The crunch of needles underfoot, the snap of a twig, Pip's soft hum. Hours passed. The deeper they went, the cooler it grew, until their breath fogged faintly even though it was high summer beyond the trees. Then, at last, the forest thinned into a clearing. In its center yawned the mouth of a cavern, rimmed with moss and stone etched in spirals that seemed too deliberate to be natural. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if heat rose though the ground was cool. "We found them," Liora whispered. Cael and Liora stood at the cavern's mouth, the silence so deep that even Pip's humming seemed too loud. The spirals etched into the stone pulsed faintly, almost like breathing. Liora reached out her fingers but stopped just short of touching them, as if some instinct warned her not to. Cael, ever the braver in appearances if not in truth, lifted a small pebble and tossed it across the threshold. It clattered, rolled, and then, before their astonished eyes, dissolved into a scatter of sparks that winked out with a hiss. "That," he whispered, "was not ordinary stone." Before either could step back, a voice echoed from within, clear and melodic, carrying the lilt of laughter and warning all at once. "Two little humans, hand in hand, come knocking on our gate. Shall we invite them, sister, or let them shiver outside?" Another voice answered, lower, rich as velvet and yet edged like a blade. "Invite them, of course. Curiosity is sweeter when tested." The cavern lit from within, not with fire but with a glow like moonlight reflected on water. Slowly, a path revealed itself, smooth and welcoming. Pip beeped once, nervously, But Liora took Cael's hand and together they crossed the threshold. The interior widened into a vast chamber whose ceiling dripped with crystals that shimmered in shifting colors. Pools of water mirrored the lights, and thin streams trickled into channels cut into the rock. Upon 2 stone thrones at the far end sat the sisters. One was tall and slender, her hair a cascade of silver that seemed woven from moonlight itself. Her eyes gleamed with mirth as she regarded the newcomers. The other was broader in form, her hair dark as obsidian, her gaze sharp enough to slice through silence. Both bore faint markings along their skin, scales that caught the light when they moved. Dragons in human guise. "So these are the brave ones," the silver-haired sister said, leaning forward with a smile that was both inviting and dangerous. "Children of the city that clings to the sky." The darker one tilted her head. "They do not look like warriors, more like dreamers who lost their way." Her tone was mocking, but there was no cruelty in it, only testing. Liora bowed her head, remembering Len's words about worthiness. "We came seeking guidance," she said, voice steady though her heart pounded. "The city of Kelmor shines again, but its light trembles. Without help it will fade. We were told you might know how to restore it fully." The sisters exchanged a glance, a flicker of some unspoken thought. Then the darker one rose, her cloak of shadows flowing like ink spilled through water. "Guidance is not given freely. It must be earned. Will you play our game?" Cael stiffened, but before he could answer, the silver-haired sister clapped her hands. At once the chamber shifted. Crystals dimmed, pools rippled, and the floor beneath them rearranged into a pattern of tiles. "3 trials," she said lightly, as though discussing weather. "One for courage, one for truth, one for heart. Pass them and you may ask what you wish. Fail and you will wander these caverns until you forget the way out." Pip beeped so loudly that the sisters laughed. Liora squeezed Cael's hand. "We will play," she said firmly, and so the first trial began. The tiles beneath their feet quivered, then rose into platforms separated by chasms of darkness. A bridge stretched across the cavern, but it was fragmented, pieces missing. "Courage," the darker sister intoned. "Cross though the path shifts. Trust your step or fall." The gap seemed impossible in places, yet Liora felt a heat stir in her chest. The pendant against her skin glowed faintly, lending her strength. She stepped forward, cape fluttering. The first tile trembled but held. Cael followed, teeth gritted, Pip bouncing nervously in his pack. Halfway across, one stone dissolved beneath Liora's boot. She gasped but leapt to the next, heart hammering. Cael nearly slipped, but she caught his arm, pulling him to safety. Together, breathless but unbroken, they reached the far side. The silver-haired sister smiled, eyes warm with approval. "Courage enough," she declared. The second trial came without pause. A mirror rose from the floor, tall as a man, its surface swirling with mist. "Truth," said the silver sister. "Face what you hide from yourself." Liora stepped forward first. The mist cleared, revealing her painting the city not with joy but with exhaustion. Her shoulders bowed under endless work, her face streaked with tears she had never let anyone see. She recoiled, shame burning her cheeks. The mirror whispered, "You fear you are only a tool, not an artist. That your worth is in labor, not in love." Her throat tightened, but then Cael's hand found hers. "No," he said softly but firmly. "I have seen the way you paint, the way you breathe life into walls. That is love itself." The mirror shimmered, then faded. Liora's knees wobbled, but she stood taller. Then Cael faced the glass. It showed him as a boy, sitting small in Sora's empty shop, certain he could never measure up, convinced that he was destined always to be second, never chosen. His voice cracked when he whispered, "I feared I would never belong anywhere." The mirror whispered back, "You hide your hunger to be more than a helper." Cael's fists clenched. Liora squeezed his hand. "You are more already," she told him. Tears stung his eyes, but he smiled through them. The mirror dissolved. "Truth enough," the sisters chorused. The third trial was the strangest. The chamber darkened until only the faint glow of crystals remained. A single flame appeared between them, fragile, flickering. "Heart," the darker sister said. "Protect what is fragile, even against despair." The flame wavered as cold winds swept the chamber. Liora cupped her hands around it, shielding it. Cael bent beside her, wrapping his own palms. Pip hummed softly, projecting a faint warmth from his little body. The winds howled harder, ice forming on the floor, but they leaned together, shoulders pressed, guarding the light with their own breath. At last the winds died. The flame brightened, steady and strong, before sinking into Liora's pendant, which glowed with new brilliance. "Hard enough?" the silver sister said, her voice almost tender. The chamber shifted back to its original form. The sisters returned to their thrones, watching with eyes now less testing and more reverent. "You have proven courage, truth, and heart," the silver-haired one said. "Ask what you wish." Liora stepped forward. "How do we save our city? Not for a night, but for all time." The darker sister leaned forward, expression grave now. "The light of Kelmor can only be secured if the bond between dragons and humans is renewed in full. Two brothers reunited was the first step, but more remain scattered. Find them, awaken them, heal what was broken. Only then will the current flow without end." Cael's voice was low. "Where do we find them?" The sisters exchanged a glance again. Then the silver one raised her hand, and a map of light bloomed across the cavern wall, mountains, seas, deserts, and beyond them places neither had ever dreamed of. Each shines in its own corner of the world. Seek them, but know that not all will welcome you. The darker one's eyes narrowed. "And beware, there are humans who would chain dragon fire for their own dominion. Already some search not to heal but to conquer." Her words echoed like a warning bell. The glow faded. The sisters rose together, their forms shimmering with hints of wings and scales. "Go now," they said in unison. "Carry our blessing, and carry our warning." The cavern dimmed behind them as Liora, Cael, and Pip stepped back into daylight. The black pines loomed, but somehow the shadows seemed less heavy than before. Liora touched her pendant, still warm, and whispered, "We will find them." Cael nodded, jaw set, but his eyes carried both determination and fear. Pip beeped twice as though to say, "On we go." They left the cavern with the weight of prophecy pressing on their shoulders. Behind them, the sisters' voices still echoed faintly, a harmony of warning and blessing. Before them stretched the endless forest of black pines, shafts of sunlight falling in narrow columns. The air smelled sharper now, touched with iron and moss, as though the very world was aware of the choice laid upon them. For a time they walked without speaking. Each was lost in thought. Cael's mind turned again and again to the image of the mirror. His smaller self lonely and unworthy. The memory burned, but Liora's words, "You are more already," moved inside him like a hidden ember. He glanced at her and saw the way her face shone in the light filtering down through the canopy, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe she might be right. Liora, meanwhile, thought of the flame they had protected together. She still felt its warmth in her chest, as though her heart itself had been reshaped. Courage, truth, heart, The trials had been tests, yes, but they were also lessons. Perhaps the city's survival would depend as much on what lived between her and Cael as on finding more dragons. Pip trilled, breaking the silence. He had darted ahead to a stream that cut through the pines, its waters glittering even in the dim light. He dipped his little arms into it, splashing in triumph. Cael laughed, the sound releasing some of the tension coiled in his chest. Even he knows to celebrate small victories, he said. Liora knelt beside Pip, letting cool water run over her palms. Small victories keep the bigger ones alive, she answered. The pendant at her neck glimmered faintly in agreement. They followed the stream until it led them out of the forest and into rolling meadows. The sky seemed impossibly wide after the claustrophobic pines. Distant mountains reared up like giants, their peaks haloed in cloud. Somewhere beyond those ranges, the sisters had said, lay the paths to other dragons. But even as they gazed ahead, movement caught their attention closer at hand. Smoke thin, curling, from a cluster of tents pitched on the meadow's edge. Approaching cautiously, they found a camp of travelers. Banners fluttered with symbols neither Cael nor Liora recognized. Horses grazed nearby, and people bustled around fires, cooking stews that smelled of cumin and roasted lamb. One man, tall with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. His voice carried authority. Strangers from the pines. Who are you, and what brings you across our land? Cael opened his mouth, but Liora touched his arm, sensing danger in revealing too much. She bowed slightly. We are seekers, walking toward the mountains. The man studied them, then nodded slowly. Seekers are many these days. Some look for legends that should remain asleep. His eyes lingered on the faint glow of Liora's pendant. She tucked it beneath her cape quickly, but not quickly enough. They were invited to share a meal, though the invitation carried an undertone of watchfulness. Around the fire, voices murmured of rumors. Strange lights in distant valleys, creatures glimpsed in storm clouds, a power stirring that had lain dormant for ages. One woman, her hair braided with beads, leaned close to Liora and whispered, some will seek dragons to heal, others will bind them in chains. Choose carefully whom you trust. Liora's heart thudded. Were these travelers allies or spies? She could not tell. That night, as they lay near the edge of the camp, Cael whispered, we cannot stay. They saw the pendant. If word spreads, others will follow. Liora nodded. Sleep was restless, filled with dreams of dragons caged in iron, their wings broken, their fire stolen. She woke with tears on her cheeks. Before dawn, they slipped away, Pip guiding with his soft glow. Days turned into weeks. The journey grew harsher. Meadows gave way to rocky plains, then to foothills where the air thinned and nights grew cold. Food dwindled, though they shared every crumb. Cael hunted rabbits once or twice, though he admitted with a rueful grin he was a poor hunter. Liora painted small symbols on stones as they went, bright markers to remind them that even in wilderness, color could endure. Pip beeped whenever spirits sagged, a loyal reminder that joy was a duty as much as a gift. But the shadow of pursuit grew. Twice they glimpsed riders far behind, banners whipping in the wind. Once they found prints in the mud near their camp, heavier than their own. And one evening, when the fire burned low, Cael swore he saw eyes gleaming red from the dark, watching. He did not tell Liora, not wanting to deepen her worry, but the unease sat in his chest like a stone. At last they reached a high pass between two peaks. Snow dusted the path and wind cut like knives. Liora pulled her cape tighter, teeth chattering, but her eyes shone with determination. The sisters said more of your kin dwell beyond, she reminded Aker in memory, though he was not here. She could almost hear his voice. Not all will welcome you. That warning rang truer with every step. On the far side of the pass, they descended into a valley unlike any they had seen. Steam rose from fissures in the ground, and pools of turquoise water bubbled as if the earth itself breathed. Strange birds wheeled overhead, their cries sharp. In the valley's center stood ruins. Pillars toppled, arches broken, carvings half buried in ash. The air vibrated faintly, a hum that set their skin tingling. "This place is alive," Cael murmured. Liora nodded, pendant glowing brighter. Pip beeped in awe. They explored cautiously, running their hands over ancient carvings. Dragons depicted with wings spread wide, humans kneeling beside them, flames drawn as threads weaving between both, unity carved into stone. And then footsteps, dozens. From the ruins emerged men and women clad in armor marked with the same banners they had seen at the travelers' camp. At their head was the scarred man, eyes hard. "You see," he said coldly, "we were right to follow. The pendant belongs to us now. With it we will command the dragons." Soldiers closed in, blades glinting. Liora's heart raced. Cael stepped in front of her instinctively, though his hands shook. Pip buzzed furiously, projecting his brightest light, but it was swallowed by steel. The scarred man extended his hand. "Give it, and we will spare you." Liora clutched the pendant. For a moment, fear clawed her throat, but then she remembered the trials. Courage, truth, heart. Courage to step where stones fall. Truth to face what lies within. Heart to guard the fragile flame. She lifted her chin. "This pendant is not for conquest," she said fiercely. "It is for love and for life. You will never have it." The man sneered. "Then you will never leave this valley." He raised his hand to signal the attack. But before swords could fall, the ground shook. From the fissures rose a roar so immense it silenced every voice. Steam blasted upward. Stones cracked. And from the heart of the ruins emerged a shadow vast and terrible, wings unfurling against the sky. A dragon, scales molten gold and obsidian, eyes blazing with fire older than empires. The soldiers faltered, terror freezing them in place. Even Cael and Liora could not move, breath stolen by awe. The dragon spoke, its voice like thunder rolling through mountains. "Who dares disturb my rest?" The scarred man dropped to his knees, shouting, "Great One, we come to serve you, to use your fire to rule the world." The dragon's eyes narrowed, and smoke curled from its nostrils. "To use?" It rumbled, voice dripping contempt. "Fools! Fire is not a chain. It is breath, gift, bond." Its gaze shifted to Liora, lingering on the glowing pendant. Recognition flared. "You carry my brother's light." Liora's knees trembled, but she forced herself to speak. "We came seeking your help. Our city lives again, but only barely. We were told the bond must be restored. Will you stand with us?" The valley held its breath. The dragon studied her, then Cael, then Pip buzzing bravely at her side. Slowly, it lowered its massive head until its eye filled her vision. In that golden depth she saw not just fire but sorrow, centuries of solitude, the weight of being misunderstood. At last it spoke. "I will test you as the sisters tested you, but not with mirrors or flames. With choice." It swung its head toward the soldiers, who cowered like insects. "They would chain me. They would chain my kind. What do you choose? To destroy them or to spare them?" Cael's hand found hers, trembling. The scarred man glared, hatred blazing. Liora's chest burned with fear and fury. She wanted to scream at them for chasing, for threatening, for daring to twist magic into conquest. But she thought of Len's words, of Acker's embrace, of the trials that had taught her that love itself was the key. Slowly, she shook her head. We will not choose destruction. If they must be stopped, let it be by their own failure, not by our cruelty. Her voice wavered but did not break. I choose life. For a long, terrible heartbeat, silence reigned. Then the dragon exhaled, a gust so warm it drove back the cold. Hard enough, it said. The soldiers scrambled to flee, their banners vanishing into the smoke. The dragon turned back to Liora and Cael. You are worthy. I will walk with you. Its form shimmered, folding inward, until a tall figure stood before them. A man cloaked in gold and black, eyes still burning with draconic fire. He bowed, solemn. I am Cael, and I am yours to call kin. Liora staggered, relief and awe flooding her. Cael laughed breathlessly, almost weeping. Pip let out a triumphant squeal that echoed against the ruins. Together, the four stood at the valley's heart, knowing the path ahead stretched further than they had imagined. More dragons to find, more enemies to face, more choices to make. But for now, with Cael at their side and the pendant glowing brighter than ever, they felt stronger. The bond was growing. The light would endure if they could hold fast. And far above, in the clouds, unseen by any of them, another pair of eyes watched, cold, calculating, waiting. The true trial had only begun.